All right, well, I'm probably going to take a lot of flack for this video, but I'm going to do a comparison here, and ultimately I'm going to show you why the 6.5 PRC is better than the 270 Winchester. Okay, so I can't tell you how many times I've seen online somebody will say something to the effect of, oh, you got to have a minimum cartridge for deer or elk. It's got to be, at least a 270 Winchester. The 270 has been around an awful long time, and it's a wonderful cartridge. I've got a Tikka rifle in 270, and it's taken a lot of big game over the years. I have nothing against the cartridge. It's a great cartridge. But the 6.5 PRC is objectively, it's better. I mean, it does more with less, if you want to think of it that way. So we're just going to go right into it by the numbers here, what I'm talking about. The easiest thing I can do here is to provide a truly side-by-side comparison. We're going to use the Hornady Precision Hunter ELDX loads. It's something you can buy them from the factory. Very comparable side by side. Both are similarly designed bullets. You can get an ELDX load for the 6.5 PRC, and you can get an ELDX load for the 270 Winchester. Okay, so when I'm looking at the long range capabilities of any cartridge, I'm looking at where the bullet in flight drops below 2,000 feet per second. For me, 2,000 feet per second represents a threshold of there's enough velocity left in that bullet that it's going to reliably expand when it hits the target. So this is here with the 145 grain ELDX bullet. This is the 270 load. So in their test rifles, 24-inch barrels, 2,970 feet per second. That's their muzzle velocity. And so I just, if you're on the Hornady website, you can plug all these values right into their ballistics calculator here. It's pretty simple. In fact, if you're in the, in fact, I'll just show you what we're looking at here. So if you went to Hornady ELDX 270 Winchester, it's going to bring up the Precision Hunter. You can scroll down here all the way to the bottom, and so it's going to give you things like their initial velocity and the energy and things that they think of their test barrel here. But you can get all the way down the bottom. It's going to give you the BC of the bullet. It's going to have a little link at the very bottom. It says view data in the ballistic calculator. So you click on that, and it takes you to what we're looking at. I've already got this window, so you got this ballistic calculator here. So I'm going to minimize that. So we've got here the 145 grain. This is the 270 load. So if I scroll down here on this far left side here, I've got the range in yards. Okay, and then the important categories we're going to look at are this third column from the right, the velocity, and if you want, the energy. So if we scroll down here, I'm looking for where the velocity goes below 2,000 feet per second. So that's going to be here between 590 and 600 yards. So let's call it 595 yards. And you can see over here, I've got these numbers already plugged in. So 595 yards is the max range at this zero altitude, that this temperature and all these other variables. that this bullet is going to go before it drops below 2,000 feet per second. Now you want to compare that, all else being equal here, to the 143 grain ELDX bullet out of the 6.5 PRC with a higher ballistic coefficient. Even it's 10 feet per second slower at the muzzle, 2960. If I bring that up and I do the same thing and I scroll down to where it drops below 2,000 feet per second, we're at 600 and somewhere between 680 and 690. So that's a 685 yard max distance for this bullet versus a 595 yard, a 90 yard advantage for the 6.5 PRC. Now, if we want to put that into even a little bit more of a context, so back at 595 yards, when the 270 dropped below its minimum threshold, the 6.5 PRC is still doing 2,100 and somewhere around 2,120, 2,110 feet per second. Okay, it's 1,420-ish foot-pounds of energy at that point. Okay, now we go back to the 270 and at 595 yards, where it drops below 2,000 feet per second, so it's 100 and something feet per second slower at that yardage. It's under 1,300 foot-pounds of energy. So for those of you who care about energy on impact, if you're looking at the max range capability in a comparison between the 6.5 PRC and the 270 Winchester, the 6.5 PRC, even though it's a slightly smaller diameter bullet, is going to have more energy at 595 yards, which is the max range in this example with this particular altitude and everything, all those variables. For the 270, the 6.5 PRC beats it hands down in both energy and velocity retention. Now, it doesn't stop there. So, as I said at the beginning, the 6.5 PRC is doing less with more. Okay, the 6.5 PRC, if you're a reloader, if you're putting grains of powder into the case, you're talking somewhere between 45 and 60 grains of powder versus 52 to 62 grains of powder in the 270 Winchester. Okay, so 57 grains of powder average in the 270 versus 52.5 average grains of powder in the 6.5 PRC. Now, why is this going to matter? When you start adding this up, you plug this into a recoil calculator, which is going to require the initial velocity, it's going to require the amount of powder charge weight, it's going to require the weight of the bullet. It's going to give you a recoil energy. So you have 20.3 foot-pounds of energy, and I just did this off of an 8-pound rifle setup, versus 18.64 foot-pounds of recoil energy. Now, that's only, 1.5 foot-pounds of energy difference, but it's still less recoil for the 6.5 PRC than the 270 Winchester, all else being equal. Less recoil and significantly more range. Now, honestly, there's going to be other things here that play even more into the favor of the 6.5 PRC over the 270, and I'll just briefly touch on them. I'm not going to pull up additional charts and such here, but if you are looking at bullet options and bullet choices, so you go to Hornady's website, for example, and for the 6.5 PRC, you can choose between factory loads in the 147 ELDM, you've got the 140 ELDM, you've got this 143 ELDX. You've got a lot of very high BC bullets to choose from. For the 270 Winchester, the 145 ELDX is it. At the top end of their hunting caliber bullets in a cup and core style with high BCs, that 145 grain bullet's it. So there's fewer choices for the 270 than for the 6.5 PRC. And that's important. If I was to compare, if I was to plug all this same data in, and instead of using the 143 ELDX, which has a lower BC, and I was to use the 140 ELDX or 140 ELDM for the 6.5 PRC, and that's what I shoot in my rifles for hunting, it's going to give you an even greater range difference. But again, alas, I'm just trying to, I want to keep this simple and just show us really true side-by-side comparison. So I'm sticking with the 143 ELDX versus the 145 ELDX. And in the end, 6.5 PRC is going to beat it hands down. So anyways, put any questions or comments below. Thanks.